Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of From the Lighthouse. I'm Stephanie and I'm joined here today by Dr. Lee O'Brien. Hi Lee.
Hello Stephanie.
And Dr. Geoff Payne.
Hi
Geoff.
Stephanie.
So we wanted to get together again because we had so much fun talking about Jane Austen.
Yay!
That we couldn't help ourselves and we wanted to talk about a specific Austen novel. And because in our last podcast the consensus was that Pride and Prejudice was the favourite of two of the three panellists, we've decided to start with Pride and Prejudice. I mean, it is the big one, so it was kind of the most obvious place to start. So Lee, this was your idea.
You're going to put, okay. Put me on the spot.
I'm going to put you on the
Yeah.
spot. Why do you love Pride and Prejudice? Why is it the novel that it is?
I've been reading Jane Austen for so long, and I just think the characters work brilliantly. We've got Lizzie and Darcy, so we've got two of the most attractive romance characters.
Mm-hmm.
And Lizzie, I think, Geoff and I were talking about Emma the other day and how Emma is a character that it's sometimes very hard to like, but Lizzie is a very likeable character, and she does develop, I think, in a very interesting way throughout the novel. So it's that characterisation. It's the whole setup. It's just a perfect romance setup, and it does what romance does. It draws you. I picked it up last week, and I just couldn't put it down. I just had to keep reading. So it's the power of the characterisation. The class politics are fascinating, and for me, as always, I'm fascinated in the way Austen represents families. Families are deeply problematic entities in Austen, and here really more so than most, I think. Both Darcy's Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the monstrous woman, and of course Lizzie's vulgar, frightening family. Although I had a very different response to Mr. and Mrs. Bennet this time around. We might get back onto that later. So I've always said I think this is a perfect romance novel. It really defines the genre. So that's why I love it, and I keep coming back to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of romance text, you know,
It
the
is,
couple that
isn't it?
hate each other at
Yes,
initially.
the antagonism,
Yeah.
then the deep enduring love, and coming together against all obstacles, because you think at certain points in the text they're just never going to get together. So much is working against them. And
Especially Lizzie.
Yeah.
Yes, especially Lizzie. Yes, the heroine is really dragging her feet, isn't she?
Who willfully refuses to acknowledge any of the signs or cues that come from Darcy from such an early point in the novel. Every time I read it, I'm surprised by how quickly Darcy turns around.
Yeah.
That's so true, and I felt that reading it. I was a little bit less taken by the romance plot this time around, I must say. But yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? That it's that overcoming obstacles, and the whole Pride and Prejudice. There are these things within the characters that have to be defeated in order for love to conquer all.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a nice idea, isn't it? Love conquering all. We're going to go with that one, aren't we?
I mean, it's very comforting. It's lovely to read. It's endlessly rereadable, endlessly entertaining.
Yes. And it's a rescue into love, which I think Austen does brilliantly. Yeah. There's the terrible surrounding families and social situations, and these two decent people must be rescued from that. That's a lovely idea.
And rewarded.
For being decent, nice human beings.
Geoff.
I think when you were talking about the way in which the novel is so interested in family and relationships, and that the connection between different levels of the social strata and the way in which that operates. It's a novel that has this really underlying serious political interest, which remains really pertinent today, but manages to do it by using a plot that is fun, characters that are engaging in lots of different ways, so not just the central characters, right? Lizzie is a great, wonderful central character. She's so energetic and lively. She's so flawed. She's witty, but she's not perfect.
No.
But alongside that central figure, there are so many other wonderful portraits,
Yes.
caricatures.
Yes. Mr. Collins.
Like Mr. Collins is one of
He's one of the great
characters in
fiction.
fiction. He's so well drawn.
Yes.
He's so.
Yes.
I mean, he's so larger than life, but he's also so real.
And he condemns himself out of his own mouth because it's all the letters and the things that he says. It's her irony works over time.
But even the more subtle figures like Charlotte Lucas,
Oh.
who
Yes.
is a peripheral character,
Yes.
but at the same time she's given
yes.
such depth and the thinking through her the
Yes.
machinations of her mind, and
Yes.
she is a good friend to Lizzie, but at the same time she's very self-interested, and it's always about how she got her eye on the advantage.
Yes.
The way in which the novel, in very subtle ways, builds such clear pictures of character with such simplicity and such elegance. I think in our last Jane Austen podcast, Steph, you mentioned the line about Mary.
Yeah, so the line that I mentioned in the last podcast was she just says about Mary, she wanted to say something clever but didn't know how. Isn't that the most beautiful descriptor of a character?
What a put down.
What a put down, but it's character description in one sentence.
It gives you so much information about her.
And it's beautifully malicious.
Yeah. The thing is that Jane Austen is the most brilliant social observer.
Oh, she is. And
I
she
mean,
has
you think that-
cruelty to her that I love.
Yeah, and you think she must have known many Mr. Collins to draw on this wonderful character who is so pathetic and funny in the way that Mr. Collins is.
But I really like the point Geoff makes about Charlotte Lucas, because her situation is desperate, isn't it? And it really exposes the marriage market for exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's you buy and sell and you have to go for the highest bidder because this is the only way you're going to be able to get a decent life in material terms. She's going to pay a terrible price for it, given the man that she has to marry and his servile, toadying ways to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. But it really makes you see that once you narrow women's options, you turn them into really quite awful people. They have to, as you say, she's jockeying for position, and she's Lizzie's friend, but she needs to marry.
Yeah,
and she needs. So there's a section where Colonel Fitzwilliam and Darcy are continually visiting the parsonage.
Yes,
and we get Charlotte's perspective on the whole thing, and she's trying to work out what's going on, and if maybe Lizzie will marry Colonel Fitzwilliam, or whether Darcy's interested in her. Lizzie has she keeps on laughing off the possibility that either of them could be interested in her, although she's a little bit disturbed about the idea of Colonel Fitzwilliam, even more, because she doesn't even credit Darcy.
No.
But Charlotte Lucas is very carefully thinking through, well, if she marries Colonel Fitzwilliam, he can't advance Mr. Collins in the church, whereas Mr. Darcy could, so she would prefer her to marry Darcy, although Fitzwilliam would be a second option.
She's
so
calculating.
She's got this eye on not only her own marriage market potential, but then also those around her who can also then advance her socially.
She's like a plotter, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
But she has to be.
She has to be.
Yes, she has to be.
And that's what Austen is so clever at doing. You know, she's showing that in this world you get jobs via who you know, via the connections that you have. You have to, as a woman, she doesn't have the option to just go out and apply for a job and build a life. She has to do all of this, and that's why she's the way she is, and so when she points out to Lizzie that this is this is a calculated move, but it's also a necessary one. You're positioned to go, well, actually, that's true.
That's true.
And I mean, one of the other wonderful things about the novel is it's so acerbically satirical of the people who refuse to see the world for what it is. At the same time, it is satirical of those people who do see the world for what it is. So it really is, Mrs. Bennet is treated scathingly in the presentation, but it's because she refuses to pretend that reality is something other than what it is. She knows that her daughters need to marry well, because otherwise they will, by their standards, will be poor.
They will be failures. They will not have a life.
And she herself as well. When Mr. Bennet dies, she will have nothing. Her daughters will have nothing.
Yes, so she knows this. I was much more sympathetic to her in this reading. I've always sort of taken her at the valuation that the narrative gives, which is that she's a profoundly vulgar and stupid woman. But I was really struck this time around with her loyalty to her daughters. She actually cares, and she's doing the best she knows how to do. And I just felt so much more sympathetic understanding of her as a character. There's a depth there, but because it's Austen, she doesn't buy that cheaply. She doesn't give her a heart of gold or something. None of that stupidity. She is a stupid, vulgar woman, but she's also, again, she's doing what she can do to help her daughters.
Yep. And she knows what the future's going to hold.
She does.
She's very she's right in a way that it's really important for her daughters to marry well, and that one daughter marrying well is going to be the means by which the other daughters have a chance to marry well.
Yeah, what is it? The trickle-down effect or the butterfly effect?
And it will throw them into the company of other rich men.
Of other rich men.
And that's exactly right. And that's exactly what Jane and Lizzie's marriages are going to do.
And Mr. Bennet won't do much to bring it about.
Well, his kind of idealism is also exposed because, he admits himself that his plan had always been to have a son.
Yes.
And that was going to fix all the problems, but he couldn't have a son. There was no son, and he had no plan B.
No plan B.
There was no other mechanism So, he doesn't want to play the vulgar game of selling his daughters off in the marriage market.
No.
But the other option then is for him to die, and for them either to, be like Lydia and expose themselves to
unscrupulous men.
There is also, this kind of faith that because they don't actually have any money, no unscrupulous men will actually be interested in them. But of course, we see that there is a lie in that, although, again, we might talk a little bit later about the Wickham
the Wise of
and
Wickham.
Lydia, Wise of Wickham.
Yes, why he did. I've been thinking a lot about that since our chat the other day. That was you raised a fascinating question. But just staying with Mr. Bennet, I guess partly because I've been reading so much Georgette Heyer, I thought he was a wonderful reading of what you get down the track with the kind of hero of the romance novel. So he's got all those kind of flaws because he's actually quite a weak character.
He is a weak character,
but because of his maleness and because of his intelligence as he sees it, he sort of can pretend to himself that he has certain virtues that his vulgar wife lacks.
And it's very easy to read the novel and say, well, Mr. Bennet is clever and he's funny and he understands Lizzie and sees her worth and so therefore likes him. But what all that he's really done, as Geoff said, is his plan A has failed. He's got no plan B, so he just retreats into his study and makes fun of his wife and his children
and his neighbours
and he doesn't actually protect them.
No, he doesn't.
And he exposes Lydia, really, and lets her expose herself.
Yes.
And so he has actually been the seed of his own kind of misfortune.
There's a section in the novel where the narrator actually talks about their marriage. This is what happens in a marriage when there is initial attraction, but in the wife there's nothing else. But it also rebounds on Mr. Bennet too. This is because he's clearly an attractive man. He's had some wealth and position. He's like your classic Regency Buck kind of hero.
And he's married a silly woman.
But he's married a silly woman. But he's got his own versions of silliness. So it's like the kind of classic romance pairing that's allowed to go off.
Yeah.
It's like putting a bowl of milk in the sun. It just goes sour.
Yes, I mean he's redeemed because he's aware of his failings and he's happy to be laughed at and to laugh at himself as much as he laughs at other people.
Yes.
So to an extent, I think that's partly why, for me anyway, he is a more endearing character because he at least has some perspective of his own limitations. He cautions Lizzie against marrying Darcy because he recognises the failure of his own marriage, the marriage of unequal.
He does. He says that, doesn't he?
Don't make the same mistake that I did. Don't do that. So he's got that serious side to it. He doesn't always pay attention to Lizzie, and that costs him dearly because he allows Lydia to go off to Brighton.
That's right. There's that long conversation where she tries to warn him, and he takes no notice.
No, she doesn't tell him about what she's discovered about Wickham.
No.
And
But she just says
No,
that
but
Lydia will
Yes.
make a fool of herself, basically.
that she's
Yes.
determined
Yeah.
to make a fool of herself, and
Yes.
she
Yes.
does. And
Yes.
he's happy for her to do so. He says that she's going to make a fool of herself sometimes,
Yeah.
and Brighton,
Yeah.
at least she'll
Yeah.
be...
And you can see there that he's kind of valuing his desire to kind of sit there and laugh at her.
Oh, yes.
Over
yes,
that,
that's
parental
right.
care and
that
control.
male privilege to sort of wash his hands and sit back and watch the silly women.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of Austen's novels are about the failure of patriarchy.
Mm.
Yeah.
And he is a failed patriarch.
Yeah.
He has only fathered daughters. He hasn't managed to carry on the male line.
Yeah.
He doesn't have authority. He doesn't have self-control. He doesn't have any of those classical masculine virtues that underpin the patriarchy. And I think that what's interesting for me as well is that it isn't a disaster. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about Austen is that you don't actually need the strong patriarch. The caveat is, does Darcy
Step in?
step in and
step in
fulfill
and
that
be
role?
that?
Is he potentially the more apt patriarch?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, he's certainly the better patriarch in terms of care of his estates and kind of the way he's seen as the ultimate kind of master.
He
of,
looks after his servants well.
Exactly.
Everybody
Pemberley is
in-
very
He's
is a
benign.
rationally run estate. Everybody's happy. His servants love him. Even the grounds are beautiful to reflect
yes, we all love
his wonderful
Pemberley.
patronage of Pemberley. Yeah.
But he's not the only option for getting by in the world.
That's right.
Because Bingley gets by
Was
and
it
he's
Bingley's?
not Darcy.
Would you call Bingley a failed patriarch?
Yes.
So would I.
Yes. Well, I think almost all Darcy is the only potential successful patriarch, but we don't know yet. He's unresolved.
Yes, I agree. And that's what troubles me a little bit about the novel, because I used to think, this is a perfect romance, everybody's happy and Lizzie and Darcy are going to be fine. And this time I was reading it and I was thinking, no, it's more open than that.
Yes.
Yes.
And they really are still mismatched.
Yeah, they are. They are indeed.
Well, remember
yes.
Mr. Bennet says of Bingley that everyone's got to cheat them out of their money
And
because they're too good-tempered.
And Lydia and Wickham are doing it. Remember,
Yeah.
they say they come and stay with them
All the time.
for so long,
Yeah.
and they actually get around to saying, well, thinking that they might ask them to leave, but they never do. So
Yeah.
they're clearly going to be sponged off for
They're
the rest of their lives.
They're kind of this merry couple
By Lydia and Wickham.
that everyone takes advantage of because they're not. They don't have the kind of
Yeah.
marriage of wit and intelligence that
Yes.
that Elizabeth and Darcy have.
Wickham's a touchstone, isn't he? To judge all the other males, how the other males cope with the threat that Wickham represents. And I
That's a
think
good point.
Bingley doesn't manage to circumvent him, and neither does Mr. Bennet, because I think Mr. Bennet's weakness really comes out when Darcy has to come in, and it costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
to
and
pay
save
off
the
Bingley's
family
debts.
where Mr. Bennet can't.
And what's
Yeah.
Mr. Bennet then imperiously states that Wickham is never coming to
yes.
the house.
That's right.
And
And then he
the very
does.
next scene,
Yeah.
there's Wickham at the house with Lydia.
Yeah, charming everyone, flirting with everyone. Yeah.
I love it. Lydia, what is it? Unbowed. Lydia was Lydia still.
Yeah.
See, I love that in the novel.
Now,
Lydia
I'm fascinated.
never-
You made a comment that Geoff made an interesting comment about Wickham the other day, and I want to know what
Oh,
the
yes.
interesting comment about Wickham was.
Well, we were talking about Pride and Prejudice, as one does while we're having
This
a
is
coffee.
really why we have this podcast. We just want to.
It's all we ever do, really.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
just sit down and
We'd
talk
sit around
about
and
Pride and
talk.
Prejudice,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
at least we other people can listen to
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
But I should let Geoff, because Geoff really asked this fascinating question about the whole
It's a question
plotting
that
of
has
the
just
novel.
troubled me for a while.
Yeah.
That in my last few readings is, and I think I have spoken to you about this before, Steph, as well. Why does Lydia elope? I mean, why does Wickham elope with Lydia?
What's in it for him?
Yes,
What's in it for him? Because
Yeah.
for me, the argument that it's all about lust, which I think you've suggested in the past, is potentially there, but he's got lots of opportunities to satisfy his lust, and there's a lot of
In a lot less
trouble
problematic way.
that
Yes.
comes with
Yes.
eloping with Lydia.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's suggestive that he's maybe got some kind of insight into. So either he's got a misconception about
Yeah.
the family's state of finances and the relationship with Aunt and Uncle Gardner and the amount of money they've got.
Yeah.
Or he's got some kind of foresight about the potential connections between Lizzie and Darcy that he wants to exploit, because so much of his energy is about exploiting Darcy, is put into exploiting
But
Darcy.
that would require a level of kind of forethought and understanding of Darcy that I don't necessarily think he has.
Yeah.
Like he would have
so
to,
that's why it's troubling to me that
Well, maybe his plan is, elope with Lydia, never intending to marry, just intending to ruin her, and then kind of deposit her back and say, well, she was up for it. What am I supposed to do here? And he never expected it to go kind of to the point that it did. Potentially, that's one kind of reading.
like your lust argument, because one of the things that I was sort of worrying about with the novel this time around is how sexuality is there but not there, as it is in Austen. And I was thinking of the difference between Mr. Knightley and Emma, and how it's implied in Emma. You understand the depth of Mr. Knightley's sexual response to Emma, sort of subterraneanly all the way through the novel. And I was thinking in Pride and Prejudice, it's not quite, those undercurrents are not, can you have clear undercurrents? They're not quite so much there in Pride and Prejudice. And I was thinking that is a problem maybe with the novel when I was reading it this time around. But I still think your lust argument holds water with Wickham. But I was thinking about what Geoff said. I don't think we can underestimate the ruthlessness of Wickham. And I was thinking the only answer to your question, because as soon as you said that, I thought, well, yes, it sort of just happens in the novel, and you think, well, why? What a stupid thing for him to do.
And he's ruthless, but he's not stupid.
No, he's not. And I was thinking, we learn about his debts. He's got huge debts.
Yeah.
He has to leave Meryton. He gets to, is it Meryton, the town?
Yeah.
He gets to the point where he just can't keep afloat anymore. And I was thinking that he elopes with Lydia because he's become so desperate. He knows he has to precipitate a scandal. He has to flush Darcy out of the woodwork. He has to make them all pay attention, and he has to present himself as a real problem to them, a problem to the Bennets and a problem to Darcy.
But he can only have that plan if he understands that there is some kind of connection between Darcy and the Bennets, which at that point in the narrative there's little to suggest.
No, okay.
I mean, there is perhaps an argument that the spurned lover is able to see attention where we as readers are all aware that Darcy is interested in Lizzie, even if Lizzie willfully refuses to see that that's a possibility.
Yes.
And presumably Wickham, as an observer, who does seem to exhibit an attraction towards Lizzie, and there's that conversation where he says, were circumstances different, you understand.
Yes, I would ask.
He would ask her to, but that can't be. So there is that.
No, that's true.
Sexual
so that's
attraction there.
Yeah, so
but,
you're right.
But
he doesn't know that he can. At the stage in the novel, you're saying he doesn't know that he can get to Darcy through a scandal.
Well, there's no reason for him to suppose that if he elopes with Lydia, that Darcy will step in and provide money.
Because they're over. Remember, when this is happening, she's in Pemberley, so she's way up north.
Yes.
And they're in Brighton, right?
Yes.
So while Lizzie and Darcy are moving closer together, he's seducing Lydia.
Yes.
So they're not. It's not like he can see that happening.
No.
However, as Geoff says, he has seen that they have a connection when they're both in Meryton, because they do talk and flirt and so forth at dances. Elizabeth and Darcy, I mean, there is a kind of flirting, at least in their own way.
Understand.
Yeah.
And in the final conversation that he and Lizzie have prior to the elopement, where he solicits her and asks her about whether her opinion of Darcy has changed, and she signals that her opinion has changed, that she no longer has quite the same view on him as she previously had, nor of Wickham.
Yes.
And maybe given that Wickham has already observed Darcy's apparent interest in her, maybe he's,
Yes.
making it. But it still seemed like a giant leap because,
It
as we
does.
know,
I think you're right. I think it is a giant leap. And you have to make so many assumptions, a lot of assumptions about Wickham, just how ruthless, how a sexual predator like that can recognise the sexual signs in other people. But
see,
there's
Charlotte
not
Lucas
enough
has
in the
recognised
novel.
it already.
So she has, okay, yeah. So if Charlotte...
The one person who hasn't recognised it is Mrs. Bennett, and she's normally got her eye really carefully on the
She does.
possibility.
And he's
for,
been so... Yes, she hates him and he's been so rude. Yes, she mistreats him. I don't know. I think you're right. I still think, therefore, that my fine idea about Wickham just being... It's like a final roll of the dice for him. I don't think it holds water because of what you've said. He doesn't... There's no way that he can know, and there's no way we're told in the novel that he can know that Lizzie and Darcy are going to be together. So therefore... And the Bennets are no help to him. So
But maybe
just
he does
total
think...
swine.
But maybe he does think that the Gardeners are going to step forward. Because that's what they do. They do step forward. They can't step forward to the extent that is required. So Darcy still has to step forward.
So he thinks...
well, I mean, we're
he's
not
like this
we're not given
parasite.
that knowledge explicitly either, because
No.
Mr. Gardner says that he wanted to step forward,
to step forward, yes.
and provide the money to.
But Darcy stepped in.
But Darcy steps in and
allow
won't
it.
let him do it.
Do
It's
it.
not that he can't do it.
Yes,
It's that
that's
Darcy
true.
won't let
Yes.
him do it.
That's right, yeah. So maybe Wickham's assumption is that, the Bennets have a rich trade, a rich family in trade, extended family in trade. So therefore, that this is a untapped gold mine that he can tap into.
And he's so desperate.
And whatever
He's-
fortune
yes.
he can get his hands on at this stage
At
is
this stage of his
valuable
life.
enough
Yes.
to him.
Add the lust, because I still think you're right, because there's that there's that narrative bit where the narrator says that Wickham's feelings for Lydia faded a lot more quickly than Lydia's faded for him. So the implication is, therefore, that there was something that he saw in her. And I think you're right. I think it's lust. I think it's sex. Because Lydia is I was saying there's no sex in the novel. Why sex obsessed? Lydia is very, she's sexual. She's overtly sexual in a way that the others aren't.
Yeah, that's right.
So and she's a kind of a player in the way that he is, although she can't be completely as a young woman. She'll grow into it. She's still only, what is she, 16, 15 or 16 in the novel.
Yeah.
So I think she's got... I thought originally that she sort of shared his ruthlessness, and they were just two people who were just willing to take the main chance, do whatever it took, kind of thing, to indulge themselves and to create trouble and maybe get rescued if they could, sort of thing.
But I don't think she's actually ruthless. I think she's young and she's uncontrolled in the way that she...
Was Lydia still wild, something, and free? I can't remember the words that are used.
Because she's never had, that...
Yeah.
Mr. Bennett's obviously kind of given up.
Yeah.
He's become more and more
Removed.
inclined to
Let
indulge his daughter's whims as he's got older, and so where Jane and Lizzie seem to have been given some kind of disciplinary structure.
He's given up.
He seems to have given up. So she gets a lot of attention from acting in the way she does.
Yes.
And she's very young. She's 15 years of age.
Yes.
So you can see how,
Which was
getting a lot
age back then.
But she's getting a lot of men. She doesn't have any kind of parental control. She doesn't have any... And
and she's a flirt.
And Mrs. Bennett encourages all of that. So if you've got, your mother kind of saying, well, this is the way you should behave because you're going to get a man this way. Well, why wouldn't she behave?
And you
way?
need a man because we need the money.
We need the money.
Yes, if you want money, you need a man.
And she's very proud of herself for getting married first. With no consciousness of what she's done.
No.
She's just like, oh, well, I beat all my sisters. Tops for me. I'm only 15 and I'm the one that got married first.
Where did I read this? Just recently about the novel, that it's fascinating that in terms, all that critique about Austen, that she's not registering the Napoleonic Wars and all these big things that are going on around her characters.
Which is just rubbish, yeah.
And this writer said it's interesting, though, the way the militia are represented entirely through the point of view of the young women.
Yeah.
They turn up and all these nice young men in their scarlet uniforms and everything. They're seen entirely in their relationship to the possibilities that they can bring to the young women in the town. I thought
Jeff and I were
with
commenting on
a
that.
subterranean aspect of threat. They are the invading force in the town.
Yeah.
And they come in and they disturb the peace.
And they cause all sorts of problems.
All sorts of trouble.
Mm.
Or they don't necessarily cause it. They become an outlet for those troubles to find expression.
Well, for the
so
women,
Lydia is already Lydia before
that's right.
But
she's just got 50 single men who've
yes.
walked into the
But
town that she can flirt with.
Enormously.
Yeah,
that's right.
exactly. She's got so
well,
many.
it then allows her to expand it beyond Meryton to Brighton. So
a whole encampment.
I just love the fact that they exist to facilitate the young women's flirtatious tendencies.
But Wickham again is the icon of the militia and what they are. He runs up gambling debts. He's when he's being discussed in the aftermath of what's happened, and it turns out that every tradesman's daughter has been accosted. And now that's hyperbole. It's the local gossip exaggerating his flaws. But at the same time, that's the other side of the militia. It's not just the flirtation and the dances and balls and the splendid uniforms. It's also the threat and disruption.
They're a nasty lot.
Well, they could be. They can be.
None of your noble military men.
Well, they're certainly
These
dashing.
Are predatory.
There's a lot made of, Mrs. Bennett comments about how dashing they are in their red coats.
As she says, I loved a red... She says to Lydia, doesn't she? I loved a red coat myself in my youth.
Exactly. So they're very sexually exciting.
They are. Oh,
but they're
very
just,
much.
They're
red.
Yeah, but they're just a bit of a nuisance,
boots,
really.
Really.
And the tight pants.
And the tight pants. We won't go there.
Geoff, you were talking a bit about the politics of the novel. I was wondering if you wanted to go into more detail.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, related to the militia. So, I think that there is this subterranean acknowledgement of those grander... and again, I did this in the last podcast, and I've done it again. I don't really mean to suggest that they are more grand or more important than what Austen
that's a problematic assumption.
It's a problematic assumption.
Yes.
The larger historical events that take place in the world around them have an impact on the narrative in the details of the militia being there, the countryside being militarised, and so that feeds into the narrative.
Yeah.
But the text itself is very political because of the way that it is interested in power, and it's interested in the way that power is disseminated, how it acts upon individuals, how it disciplines individuals or fails to discipline them, what troubles in the human character need to be controlled by external mechanisms and forces. And so the interest in the family is one thing. The interest in the way in which young women are constructed as problems that need to be managed.
Problems that need to be solved.
Way or another.
Yeah, I love that.
The options for young women are so restrained and constricted that creates another set of problems which are political in nature as well. So I think that for me the novel is immensely political, but it's not necessarily so overtly interested in the wider historical narratives.
Yes.
But as we've, I think, come to relatively comfortably accept in academic circles in the last 30 or 40 years, that larger politics isn't the only valid politics.
No.
But I mean, even the larger politics is there, but in subtle ways. So, what is often overlooked about Bingley is his new money. He's come out of trade.
Yes, it's actually said that the sisters don't quite talk about that as much. They don't. They emphasise their relations going back, forever, but they don't mention. They don't like mentioning that the money as it comes from trade.
Exactly, and
they
don't
that's one
have
of the reasons.
Like their mushrooms.
It's one of the reasons that explains their really hostile reception to the gardeners.
Yes,
they don't want to be tainted by a acknowledgement of that kind of association.
So true,
Yeah. And I mean, that's why Bingley's there in the first place, because he's looking to buy an estate.
Yes.
He's not from the landed gentry. He is a newcomer. He has got money in order to buy into the gentry, but he is not.
Yes.
You know, he hasn't got years and years of property ownership like Darcy has behind him. So there's a real shift registered there in the way power is distributed. Money now is just as important as family name.
Yes.
You know, Darcy might have the family name, but look at Bingley.
And you realise, just listening to what you're saying about the desperation of Caroline Bingley.
Yeah.
Because she gets so blindsided by Lizzie.
Yeah.
And she handles it all
is she
so badly.
setting herself up for Darcy, or is she setting Bingley up for Georgiana, or is it both?
No, I think she's setting herself. Oh no, she's setting her cap fiercely at
She's
Darcy.
setting her cap fiercely, but she wants Bingley as well for Georgiana. I think. Yeah. Because I mean that there wasn't necessary. I mean, you know, that's not.
There's a
not
point
a
in the
problem,
narrative where
you know.
where Lizzie says, "Poor Carolyn."
I can't remember that.
She said, I'm pretty sure
but
she's
it's
setting
more
up
to
both
do
ways.
with-
I can't remember where that comes.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
She's just there to grab. She wants Darcy big time.
Oh yeah. She wants Darcy big time, but I do
Yeah.
think that she does want Bingley for Georgiana as well.
Yes.
And that's going to work in their favour.
And she makes that stupid error that she thinks if she just criticises Lizzie to Darcy, that will make him see Lizzie the way she does, and it's such a miscalculation on her part.
Oh yeah.
And it comes out of her desperation, though, and I just like relating that to the economics that you're bringing up.
Yeah.
Because obviously you've got that unholy conjunction between the new money, and if they can buy themselves into the aristocracy, then and titles and landed blah blahs.
And the aristocracy needed that money.
They need it.
Yeah.
So it's this unholy
Well,
kind of...
the icon for the aristocracy in the novel is Lady Catherine de Bourgh and Anne.
Yes.
These pathetic two women
the
who...
sickly daughter. Is
sickly
that her
daughter.
The sickly daughter. Reminds me of Conrad in Castle of Otranto. I wonder helmet doesn't fall on her. But yet, and Lady Catherine de Bourgh is so vile.
Oh yeah.
Just this woman who thinks she has a right to meddle in everything.
Well, that's what she says about, you know, Darcy and her daughter, that when they're in their cradles, you know, her and Darcy's mother are plotting their future marriage to shore up the dynasty. You know, it's
I want it.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
But she's completely actually powerless because nothing that she wants to happen ever does.
And we're talking about vulgarity.
Yeah.
The vulgarity and the nastiness of her far outweighs anyone else in the novel. Poor Mrs. Bennet looks positively benign compared to Lady Caroline de Bourgh.
I think that
Caroline Catherine de Bourgh.
Yeah, the 1995 adaptation does that so well when she's just standing there and wandering around the garden and yelling and
and she looks in cupboards and she's just awful. Geoff was talking about the failure of patriarchy. Well, it's not as if the novel gives any easy answers that, let's have a matriarchy.
No.
That's out of the question.
Although Lady Catherine de Bourgh is, again, because systemically she has inherited a patriarchal system, part of the reason that she has little power derives from the fact that she is a woman and a matriarch can't effectively embody the patriarch because she lacks the equipage.
Dear me.
Great way to put it.
But that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why she's so inert. She can't really do anything. And the only thing that she can do is she can meddle and she can boss her nephews around.
Yes. But she has her property and she has her status.
She can condescend to Mr. Collins.
Yes. And it's interesting. We don't actually see her in... She doesn't have much luck making other people in the novel toady to her, does she? I mean, Lizzie, obviously, really tells her off in no uncertain terms in those wonderful scenes. But,
are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
Thus polluted, yes. I don't think anyone else has seen sort of bowing down at the de Bourgh
I mean,
shrine.
Charlotte Lucas does, as Mrs. Collins does, but it's not in the same way as Mr. Collins. It's more, again, with the eye to the advancement of Mr. Collins and what...
She'll do what she has to.
And
But
it's
she's not
much
going to
more
worship at the
rational,
altar.
And
Yeah.
it's
But
kind of evasive. The way
But
she
I mean,
does
even in Mr. Collins, in that letter that he writes to Mr. Darcy,
I love
warning
it.
him that Lady Catherine de Bourgh doesn't approve of Darcy's marriage, and so therefore that of Lizzie's marriage to Mr. Darcy, and that he needs to proceed cautiously. He's not advising Lizzie to not marry Mr. Darcy, because I think again he can see his eye towards a greater prize to whom he can toady and kowtow so even his obsequiousness has its limits in relation to Lady
So
Catherine
what
de
does he
Bourgh.
say
If
in
there
the
is
letter? I thought he was warning.
he was
warning him off.
warning them to proceed with caution.
Oh, was
Yeah.
he? Oh, I
And
thought he
that-
was telling him, don't do it, don't be silly. Oh, I'll have to have a look at that.
That it
again.
would invoke the displeasure of Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Right.
And he's clearly
don't wanna
setting
do that,
himself
do
up
we?
as a toady to Mr. Darcy. And the way remember the first scene in which he discovers that Mr. Darcy is Lady Catherine de Bourgh's nephew,
Oh, it's
and he starts toadying up to
It's
him
just
as well. So he will toady up
cringe-making,
to
isn't it?
anybody who he
Yes.
can kind of latch onto.
And what does he have to do? He has to, when they do become engaged, he has to retreat to Lucas Lodge, doesn't he? He has to get out of the
Yeah, because
parsonage.
she's so
'Cause
furiously
she's so
angry.
furious, and he has to just leave the
It's
area.
that brilliant image of her just sitting there stewing in her own bile. It's great.
Yes.
I mean, she's such an endlessly funny character.
But that's all about politics, as you're
Yeah.
saying, Geoff. You know, the politics of families and family wealth and family position,
Yeah.
and how that is going to be perpetuated, and how you control that, given that you've got a whole lot of young people with their own desires who are likely to mess up your neat plans, you know, without so much as a by your leave.
And she is a victim of the system that
Yeah.
she's grown up inside of.
Oh, I
No,
suppose
she is. She's
yes.
entirely
yes.
constructed.
I don't like her. I'm not hearing.
I don't like her either.
No, 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 no.
You're not meant to like her. It's
No, absolutely not. Yeah, she's a great villain. But as
she's
Geoff said,
vile.
she is, and she's also from a kind of different world, because remember,
Yeah.
this is the time when marriage was shifting from a kind of, you know, economic arrangement, which it
Yes.
still is,
Yes.
but there's like more of a, you know, interest in effective unions,
the
in, you know,
companionate
companionate marriage.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's represented by
Yes.
Elizabeth and Darcy.
Yes, it is.
But there's also so
Yes.
many marriages in the
Yes.
novel,
Yes.
presumably her one, which is about shoring out money and titles, and,
Yes.
and love has nothing
Yes,
to do with it.
nothing whatsoever.
This is
to
a
do with it
changing
at all.
world, you know,
Yes,
where love is
yes.
becoming the reason you get married, rather than kind of, well, it might happen anyway.
The novels
You know?
want to see it as a changing world, don't they? I sometimes wonder to what extent the novels are actually registering a social change, or trying to promote,
Or trying to create it.
Create it, yes,
That's an interesting
and
question.
trying to really shore up through the romance plot the ideal of the companionate marriage in the absence of the real working of that ideal. That's what fascinates me about the general politics of the romance plot, what it's actually doing.
Is it promoting that idea of the companionate marriage, or is it actually...
Yes. Is it registering,
Yeah.
or is it actually trying to impose a way of behaving? Because that comes out in a lot of criticism of the novel as a pernicious form, doesn't it? That it shows things that people should not actually be doing. And sensation fiction cops all this flack, but realist fiction did too. And that whole idea that the novel is going to put desires into people's heads, and it's going to be the end of civilization as we know it. And I was just wondering how much the romance plot and the companionate marriage gets caught up in the politics of reading and what it's doing, and because it seems to me that if you push something as hard as romance is pushed in the 19th century, it means that it's a weak thing, not a strong thing. That you don't, if it was really working, and if this change was really happening in a way that was, you know, good and acceptable or whatever, you wouldn't have to have this endless reiteration of the romance plot.
Well, I mean, even in Pride and Prejudice, you can see how few actual companionate marriages are, apart from the Gardners and Elizabeth and Darcy.
Yes.
There's none.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, it doesn't
Well,
work.
Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet
Originally.
are a companionate marriage as well, but they're what goes wrong in companionate marriage, whereas the Gardners seem to be what could go right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's certainly a worrying, at least, over what marriage is and does, what it should be.
Yes.
And I think that's unresolved, and so
Yes, I
that's
think so
part of
too.
the the ending of the novel, insofar as it resolves the romance plot, it resolves it in an institution that has been demonstrated to be troublesome, problematic, fraught throughout the novel. And so therefore it does leave it at a point where there is a seemingly happy ending, but that there are lots of different ways in which that could go that could be troubling. We're kind of given the after
we are.
information
I think
that
we are
is suggestive that it does turn out.
I think so. Yes, I think so. Especially with Elizabeth and Darcy. I think the Bingleys always stay happy, but they get preyed upon.
Yes.
But I think you're right. Yes, we are to believe in Elizabeth and Darcy.
I think we're to believe in all of Austen's marriages.
Yes.
You know, she doesn't, with the main kind of central figures anyway. We kind of are left with that very pleasing, kind of fulfilling, idea of them as a married couple.
But the views of all of them as marriage couples is at a distance.
Yeah.
So it's the idyllic portrait of the marriage from the outside,
without
investigating inside what is.
Yes.
Well, and actually that's quite different with Elizabeth and Darcy, because you do get a little glimpse of their married life where she's always teasing him and he learns to kind of laugh at it. And
he learns to be a little bit more like Lizzie.
Exactly. And so you get an insight. But what she doesn't do really with many of the others is show you that. She zooms out straight away. She just says, oh, they were happy. And this.
What did she say? What a lady. And I was just thinking that this, is it in Emma, is it Admiral Croft and his wife?
That's Persuasion.
Where she drives. Yeah, okay, and she and they're very close, and there's some scenes where he's driving, but she takes the reins. And there's that idea of
and she's a sailor's wife, and she goes with him on the boat.
And she goes everywhere with him, and you get the impression that is a deeply happy marriage because the power shifts between them. Yeah, and so it's persuasion. That's interesting. I think it's hard to know to what extent, the action of time on romance and age setting in and sexual attraction not always being what it was and all those kinds of life things. It is sort of, if you ask me why I like Pride and Prejudice, I guess it's because the novel at certain levels can ignore that reality.
Yeah.
We get to the end and everybody lives happily ever after.
And I mean, and to go back to the kind of original point that you make, because Elizabeth and Darcy are so likable as hero and heroine. I mean, Darcy's got his problems at the beginning, but you given enough to know that he's a good man.
Yes.
Underneath it all, even when you think he is proud.
That's right.
It's very easy to kind of not focus on those kind of real systemic problems that Austen throws up around the institution of marriage and the way power is distributed in marriage, because you just focus on they're so great, and they're so great together, and it obviously works.
Love conquers all.
Yeah, that it's easy to kind of not read the politics of it, I think, and just to focus on the happy ending and the kind of the progress of the romance.
And then I wonder if there's a way in which Jane Austen's wit and irony actually asks us to be more sceptical about the endings and about the love conquers all thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Because she's got that. I just love. Everything is said and then it's undercut. And
I mean, that's even from the first sentence,
Yes.
I mean, it's a truth
universally acknowledged that a man of
single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. I mean, there's levels of irony in that.
And that is just. Where does the irony reside in that sentence?
Yeah.
It's in universally acknowledged, isn't it? Because it's not.
Yeah, and I mean, is it truth?
And what type of truth? You automatically have to.
Yeah.
Well, that's Jane Austen, isn't it? You really cannot underestimate.
And also on the question of want.
Yeah.
Yes.
So whether it's desire or lack or a combination of both. And
I think you could deconstruct almost every sentence in the novel and find those layers of complexity. So maybe there's something in the actual fabric of the narration and the language that makes us be, because we love Austen, but we're all sceptical in our different ways about the resolutions of the plot. And maybe it's not just us being brilliantly sceptical. Maybe we are responding to the actual the language itself.
Well, the one that always makes me kind of think of the line that always makes me think of that is the end of Northanger Abbey, when she says, to find true happiness at the age of 17 and 19 or whatever it is truly special indeed. And I'm like, are you sniggering at us?
Yes.
Down your
she
exactly.
undercuts everything.
Exactly.
And whether this is to support parental tyranny or whatever, I leave that to the reader.
Or reward disobedience. Exactly. She's never straightforward.
She knows. She's just the most knowing writer.
Yeah, she's just. You can imagine this, quiet woman sitting there and going, I understand how this is all working, and I'm going to, it's like taking to society with a scalpel. People don't read.
People
her.
Don't understand that. You talk a lot of tripe about her.
Yeah, the Dear Aunt Jane thing that we talked about in our last podcast. Yeah,
she's lethal.
Yeah, she is.
Wonderfully lethal. Yeah.
And there's so many examples, brilliant examples of that in Pride and Prejudice. Mary.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't even really talked about Mary that much, but she's so brilliantly kind of done. And Lady Catherine and Mr. Collins, and even very, very minor figures.
Yeah. And Kate, the other sister, is it
Kitty?
Kitty,
Yes.
It's dragged along in Lydia's way.
Well, and also the way that everybody is so cognizant of all the flaws of all the other people and are willing to exploit them to their fullest.
Yeah.
So Mary can be exploited in order to attract Mr. Collins' attention away from other people because, they all know how obsessed she is with religiosity and sermonizing and what have you.
Yes,
and showing off her own intelligence.
And showing off her own intelligence, which is entirely limited.
Yeah, a self-perception of intelligence, perhaps.
Doesn't it make you wonder what kind of people Austen was surrounded by?
Yeah.
What kind of families actually gave her this miraculous education into the sheer nastiness of family life?
Yeah, I've always thought that
clergy. There's nothing like the clergy for gaining an insight into human failings.
Hypocrisy on a really
people
massive
talk
scale.
about Jane Austen as this, deeply devout woman. And I'm like, the way she represents she may have been privately, but the way she represents the institution of the clergy is just unbelievable. She shows you all the hypocrisy, all the stupidity of the institutions that she's surrounded by.
She does. She's cynical is not the word. It's more interesting than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's least.
The line that always comes up for me is Mr. Bennet's line about why do we exist, but to provide sport for our neighbours and laugh at them in our turn.
Again, the irony.
Yeah.
But it's also, so we all acknowledge, we laugh at other people, we are flawed humans, and we understand that we're going to be laughed at as well. And I think it's that double-sided vision that Austen has, where there is the satire, but it's not blindly unaware of the failings of the self and the limitations of other positions. It's aware of the limitations of all positions, and it sets them in dialogue with each other and creates drama out of a group of people who, for the most part, see themselves as acting well.
Yes. And how do you become a decent human being in the face of all this?
Yeah. In the social world of which we all have to negotiate.
Yes,
I think that's a brilliant place to end this discussion. Thank you. This has been a delightful idea, Lee.
We've enjoyed ourselves.
I mean, we're pretty much going to have to do one for every Austen novel now, aren't we?
Oh, no. Are we?
Oh, come on, Geoff, you love it.
Look, no dragging of the feet. You can't leave us now.
How can you ever tire of talking about Austen?
No, we never do.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Steph.
So this has been another episode from The Lighthouse. If you could please remember to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, that would be extremely helpful. And we'll be back with you again in about a week or so. Thank you. Bye.